There are moments in the human story when the world almost turned into something unrecognizable, when a single hidden choice could have rewritten everything you think you know. The future we inherited was never guaranteed. It was just the one path that survived the silence. If you want to explore the worlds that almost replaced ours, subscribe. Welcome to Parallel History. For thousands of years, the idea of Atlantis has lived in the uneasy space between memory and myth. The earliest known written account comes from the Greek philosopher Plato, around 360 BCE. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he describes a mighty island civilization beyond the pillars of Heracles, richer than any kingdom of its age, technologically advanced and powerful enough to rival the ancient Mediterranean world. According to Plato's story, Atlantis was no ordinary land. It commanded vast fleets, engineered complex irrigation systems, and built monumental temples plated with precious metals. But with power came ambition. Atlantis, he wrote, turned from virtue to conquest, challenging even Athens itself. And then, just as abruptly as it rose, Atlantis fell. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island sank beneath the sea, lost forever. Historians have debated the tale for centuries. Was Plato recounting a distant cultural memory? Perhaps a distorted echo of the Minoan eruption at Thera around 1600 BCE, which triggered tsunamis, economic collapse, and the decline of Mediterranean kingdoms. Was Atlantis an idealized philosophical lesson, not meant to be taken literally? Or was it a mixture of memory, metaphor, and political commentary? Archaeology has provided no definitive answer. Some theories place Atlantis near the Azores, others in the Caribbean, and many closer to the Mediterranean itself. But the truth remains elusive. The world we inherited is one in which Atlantis, if it existed at all, vanished before written history could fully capture it. Madnesque, but imagine a different beginning. Suppose the civilization Plato described was real, not a moral parable, not a poetic symbol, but an advanced maritime empire. And suppose it did not fall into the sea. Suppose its priests, engineers, or astronomers foresaw the coming cataclysm and stopped it. What if Atlantis survived? How would its endurance reshape the ancient world? How would religions, empires, trade networks, and scientific revolutions look in a timeline where the greatest seafaring power of the Bronze Age never disappeared? But what if this moment had gone differently? History didn't end. It just went elsewhere. The divergence begins around 1600 to 1500 BCE, during the catastrophic volcanic eruption of Thera, one of the most violent natural disasters of antiquity. In our timeline, this eruption devastated the Minoan civilization on Crete, shattered trade networks across the Aegean, and may have fueled the legends that Plato later shaped into Atlantis. In our new timeline, the Atlanteans are not unprepared. They are a maritime superpower whose society is built on astronomical knowledge, tidal observation, and a priestly class that carefully records seismic fluctuations. For decades, they have observed increasing geothermal activity beneath the ocean floor. The island's High Council debates what the signs mean. Some fear the gods' anger. Others suspect a natural cycle. But one faction, engineers and natural philosophers, proposes action. Atlantis begins constructing vast seawalls, drainage channels, and pressure-release tunnels carved deep into the island's bedrock. Their shipwrights reinforce the hulls of their largest vessels to withstand violent waves. Their priests schedule controlled evacuations for coastal districts during periods of tremor. When the great eruption comes, it is unimaginable in scale-towering ash columns. Tsunamis, shockwaves, echoing across continents, yet Atlantis endures. Entire neighborhoods are destroyed, but the island does not disappear beneath the sea. Their seawalls hold long enough to redirect the worst of the incoming waves. Their reinforced ports save large parts of the fleet. Their knowledge, part science, part religion, keeps them alive. But survival is only the beginning of the divergence. With neighboring Minoan Crete in ruin, with Mycenaean Greece destabilized, with Egypt suffering crop failures from volcanic ash filtering the sun, Atlantis finds itself the only intact maritime superpower in a devastated Mediterranean world. A vacuum has opened. Atlantis steps into it. They offer aid to famine-stricken Egypt in exchange for diplomatic recognition. They establish protectorates over shattered Aegean islands. Their traders reach as far as Iberia, West Africa, and the British Isles. And their priests, who save the island through foresight, gain immense political influence. The divergence crystallizes in one moment. Atlantis survives the Thera eruption while its rivals collapse. From this moment, the ancient world is no longer Mediterranean-centered. It tilts westward toward the Atlantic. The first shockwave approximately equals 610 words. The first 1 to 5 years after divergence. The survival of Atlantis sends immediate shockwaves through the ancient world. In the first year, Egypt reels from failed harvests caused by ash cloud dimming. The Nile floods unpredictably. Pharaoh's advisors are divided. Some believe the gods are punishing them. Others see opportunity in aligning with the only stable maritime power left. When an Atlantean convoy arrives, grain in its holds, engineers on board Egypt's court hesitates, then welcomes them. Atlantis gains privileged access to the Nile Delta, establishing enclaves that function as semi-independent trade ports. Their merchants introduce new bronze alloys and naval technologies. Their priests integrate with Egyptian astronomers, exchanging star charts and calendar calculations. Meanwhile, in the Aegean, chaos reigns. The Minoan palaces lie in ruins. Mycenaean tribes struggle to unify. Pirates, displaced farmers, and minor warlords fight over shattered islands. Atlantis intervenes as peacekeeper. They offer grain and tools in exchange for submission to a maritime league. Desperate, the island peoples agree. Within 5 years, a new geopolitical order emerges. Atlantis commands the western seas. Egypt becomes an uneasy partner, grateful but wary. The Aegean tribes become dependent vassals. Phoenician traders adapt, avoiding open confrontation but feeling the pressure. The shockwave continues inland. Atlantean artifacts begin appearing in trade routes, stretching into Anatolia and the Levant. Tin vital for bronze production is now funneled through Atlantean-controlled channels. This gives them near-total control over Bronze Age warfare. Culturally, their influence spreads even faster. Their architecture massive, concentric structures, elevated temples, hydraulic systems becomes a model for ambitious rulers who seek to emulate their power. Their philosophical teachings, blending astronomy, ethics, and myth, intrigue Mediterranean elites, but the greatest shockwave is psychological. For centuries, the ancient world was decentralized, a patchwork of competing powers. Now it witnesses the rise of a single maritime hegemon. Every kingdom watches Atlantis with a mixture of admiration and fear. Rumors spread of their divine protection, their prophetic abilities, their hidden technologies. These 5 years forge a new reality. Atlantis is not merely a survivor. It is becoming the architect of a new world. And yet, every empire's rise creates new tensions, alliances forged under pressure, rivalries born from resentment, and vassals who submit only because they must. The first shockwave is stabilization. The second, still building, will be transformation. The survival of Atlantis sends immediate shockwaves through the ancient world. In the first year, Egypt reels from failed harvests caused by ash cloud dimming. The Nile floods unpredictably. Pharaoh's advisors are divided. Some believe the gods are punishing them. Others see opportunity in aligning with the only stable maritime power left. When an Atlantean convoy arrives, grain in its holds, engineers on board Egypt's court hesitates, then welcomes them. Atlantis gains privileged access to the Nile Delta, establishing enclaves that function as semi-independent trade ports. Their merchants introduce new bronze alloys and naval technologies. Their priests integrate with Egyptian astronomers, exchanging star charts and calendar calculations. Meanwhile, in the Aegean, chaos reigns. The Minoan palaces lie in ruins. Mycenaean tribes struggle to unify. Pirates, displaced farmers, and minor warlords fight over shattered islands. Atlantis intervenes as peacekeeper. They offer grain and tools in exchange for submission to a maritime league. Desperate, the island peoples agree. Within 5 years, a new geopolitical order emerges. Atlantis commands the western seas. Egypt becomes an uneasy partner, grateful but wary. The Aegean tribes become dependent vassals. Phoenician traders adapt, avoiding open confrontation but feeling the pressure. The shockwave continues inland. Atlantean artifacts begin appearing in trade routes, stretching into Anatolia and the Levant. Tin vital for bronze production is now funneled through Atlantean-controlled channels. This gives them near-total control over Bronze Age warfare. Culturally, their influence spreads even faster. Their architecture, massive concentric structures, elevated temples, hydraulic systems becomes a model for ambitious rulers who seek to emulate their power. Their philosophical teachings, blending astronomy, ethics, and myth, intrigue Mediterranean elites. But the greatest shockwave is psychological. For centuries, the ancient world was decentralized, a patchwork of competing powers. Now it witnesses the rise of a single maritime hegemon. Every kingdom watches Atlantis with a mixture of admiration and fear. Rumors spread of their divine protection, their prophetic abilities, their hidden technologies. These 5 years forge a new reality. Atlantis is not merely a survivor. It is becoming the architect of a new world. And yet, every empire's rise creates new tensions, alliances forged under pressure, rivalries born from resentment, and vassals who submit only because they must. The first shockwave is stabilization. The second still building will be transformation. Over the next 2 centuries, Atlantis evolves from a maritime superpower into the axis around which much of the known world revolves. At the national level, the island undergoes rapid reconstruction after the Great Eruption. The priest-engineer caste that saved the island becomes the ruling elite. They codify new laws, emphasizing environmental balance, disaster preparedness, and resource management. Their society develops a unique equilibrium between spiritual authority and scientific empiricism. Temples double as laboratories, priests double as astronomers. Religious festivals track celestial events with increasing precision. This blend of faith and engineering drives innovation. They experiment with early forms of aqueducts, water pressure systems, and large-scale bronze foundries. Their naval fleets become unmatched, sleek hulls, reinforced joints, and advanced sails that allow long-distance travel into the Atlantic. Trade expeditions reach West Africa, the Canary Islands, and potentially even the Caribbean, long before European sailors would in our timeline. Regionally, the balance of power shifts westward. The Aegean remains under loose Atlantean hegemony, never fragmenting into the constant warfare that characterized ancient Greek city-states in our timeline. Without the complete collapse of Minoan influence, the Mycenaean conquests slow. Greek culture develops with stronger maritime traditions, more centralized under Atlantean oversight. Heroic epics evolved differently, emphasizing oceanic voyages and Atlantean alliances rather than land-based warfare. Egypt remains the most significant land-based power. However, with continued Atlantean presence in their delta ports, Egyptian technology gains maritime sophistication. Atlantean star charts refine Egyptian calendars. In return, Egyptian architecture influences Atlantean temple design. Monumental, axial, symbolically cosmic, further east. The Phoenicians, famed for their seafaring, do not rise to dominate Mediterranean trade as they did in our timeline. Instead, they become specialists, shipwrights, navigators, and mercantile intermediaries serving the broader Atlantean network. Carthage, rather than becoming a rival to Rome centuries later, emerges as an Atlantean-aligned trading metropolis. Culturally, this new world becomes a fusion of maritime intellectualism and land-based ritualism. Atlantean myths spread. The belief that civilization is always one disaster away from ruin, an idea baked into their collective memory. This worldview emphasizes resilience, preparation, and cooperation among nations. Religion evolves along similar lines, rather than pantheons rigidly separated by culture. A proto-syncretic belief system forms around shared symbols: water as purifier, the sky as clock, the earth as fragile. Priests from different regions collaborate in councils sponsored by Atlantis, debating cosmology, ethics, and mathematics. This reduces the kind of religious conflict that would later dominate the Near East in our timeline. Scientifically, the Atlantean presence accelerates the development of metallurgy, astronomy, and irrigation techniques. They standardize units of measurement across their sphere of influence. Their knowledge of tides and oceanic cycles leads to early concepts resembling protophysics. Their central library, established around 1300 BCE, becomes the largest depository of knowledge in the ancient world, attracting scholars from as far as Nubia and Iberia. Atlantis also introduces standardized maritime laws, regulating piracy, trade disputes, and shipbuilding standards. This leads to safer trade routes and a booming economy that enriches the entire region. Over centuries, their influence deepens. When the Bronze Age collapses around 1200 BCE, in our timeline, triggered by migrating peoples, drought, and war, the Atlantean-centered world avoids much of this chaos. With Atlantis enforcing oceanic stability, mass migrations do not devastate coastal cities to the same degree. The continuity of trade maintains the livelihoods of smaller kingdoms. Knowledge is not lost in dark centuries. The ripple effects reshape global history. Europe becomes more culturally connected to North Africa and the Near East. The Mediterranean transitions into a unified economic basin far earlier. Bronze metallurgy remains dominant longer, but ironworking begins under centralized Atlantean regulation. Written language spreads more quickly due to standardized trade scripts. The result is a world without a pronounced dark age, a world where knowledge accumulates continuously rather than being lost and rediscovered. A world where the ocean is a unifying force, not a barrier. Atlantis, once a myth, becomes the empire that defines an Aegean age that grows for centuries, shaping continents, beliefs, and the very rhythm of civilizational progress. By the modern era, the world shaped by Atlantis looks profoundly different from our own. The island itself has become a hybrid of ancient tradition and advanced technology, a maritime capital whose architecture mixes geometric temples, underwater observation domes, and coastal cities connected by elevated causeways. Its political system remains a priest-engineer council, though now elected by guilds and scientific institutions. Spirituality and empirical study never diverged. Instead, they merged into a unified worldview that values reason as a sacred pursuit. This philosophical foundation shapes global institutions. Instead of Europe becoming the center of the Renaissance, the Atlantean Enlightenment, a long continuum of scientific growth, spreads across the Western Hemisphere. By the time Europe undergoes feudal fragmentation, Atlantean influence stabilizes maritime trade routes, preventing the complete economic stalls that defined our Middle Ages. The age of exploration happens earlier, but under different principles. Atlantean fleets reach the Caribbean and Eastern Americas centuries before Columbus. Because their culture values cultural exchange over conquest, they establish trade alliances with indigenous civilizations. The Aztec and Maya worlds exchange astronomical knowledge with Atlantean scholars. North American societies gain new agricultural and metallurgical techniques, while Atlantis learns new methods of ecological stewardship. By the 17th century, in this alternate timeline, the Atlantic is not a frontier. It is a well-charted highway. European kingdoms still expand, but never dominate the world as aggressively. Without the same incentives for colonial conquest, because the Atlantic systems are already integrated, global power is shared rather than monopolized. In the 19th century, industrialization unfolds as a cooperative project led by Atlantean research councils. Their mastery of hydraulic systems leads to early hydroelectric prototypes. Steam engines evolve in tandem with water pressure technologies. Factories are designed with efficiency and safety in mind, guided by the Atlantean ethic of balance rather than exploitation. By the 20th century, superpowers emerge not from competition, but from networks. Atlantis forms the core of a global oceanic federation, linking West Africa, Iberia, the Mediterranean, and the Americas. Its rivals or partners are powerful land-based blocs, a unified Egypt-Levant alliance, a strong Persian scientific polity, and East Asian empires that developed largely independently but now engage through Atlantean-mediated diplomacy. Wars still occur, but without the same colonial scramble that fueled our world's global conflicts. The scale is smaller and more regionally contained. There is no World War I as we know it. Alliances remain flexible, shifting with trade needs rather than rigid nationalist ideologies. World War II occurs in a limited form of conflict centered in Eurasia rather than global cataclysm. Atlantis serves as mediator and humanitarian hub, leveraging centuries of disaster response expertise. Nuclear development begins later. Approached cautiously due to Atlantean influence, emphasizing environmental harmony and the dangers of imbalance. By the 21st century, the world is multipolar but interconnected, a planetary system built on millennia of shared oceanic culture. Technology reflects this maritime heritage. Cities emphasize coastal resilience. Floating research platforms study ocean currents with unprecedented precision. Renewable energy, tidal, geothermal, and hydro is the norm. Environmental policy is deeply tied to spiritual ethics. Artificial intelligence and robotics develop, but under control of councils that prioritize societal stability over unchecked experimentation. Culturally, the Atlantean worldview permeates global thought. People view civilization as fragile but improbable. The memory of the ancient eruption preserved in ritual and education reminds societies that nature is powerful but predictable if respected. Global cooperation is not a utopian ideal. It is the legacy of millennia of necessity. Yet, despite this harmony, tensions remain. Powerful land-based empires sometimes bristle under Atlantean maritime norms. Some nations resent their influence over oceanic trade. But overall, the planet is more resilient, more unified, and more cautious than our world. The greatest difference is philosophical. Humanity sees itself as steward of a delicate planet, not conqueror of it. Atlantis survived and, in doing so, it became the blueprint for a civilization that blends ancient wisdom with scientific ambition, shaping a world where the boundaries between myth and progress blur in the glow of a shared human destiny. But survival always demands sacrifice. Atlantis preserved knowledge, stabilized continents, and prevented eras of collapse. Yet its guiding philosophy, the belief that disaster is always imminent, casts a shadow over its achievements. The memory of nearly sinking into the sea shaped a culture defined by vigilance, sometimes bordering on paranoia. Their councils, though wise, hold immense power. The fusion of spiritual authority and scientific leadership creates a class of elites whose decisions often go unquestioned. Innovation is encouraged, but always within boundaries set centuries earlier. Technologies deemed unbalanced or risky are delayed or suppressed. Nuclear research, genetic engineering, and certain artificial intelligence projects evolve slowly, constrained by deep-seated fear of unintended consequences. This cautiousness protects the world from catastrophe, yet prevents certain breakthroughs that might have transformed daily life. Medicine advances steadily, but without the rapid leaps that crises often force. Space exploration lags behind our timeline. Resources and focus remain tied to Earth's oceans rather than distant stars. Culturally, the Atlantean emphasis on unity can slip into conformity. Dissent is tolerated, but often dismissed as dangerous individualism. Artistic movements struggle against the expectation that all expression must reflect cosmic balance and social harmony. Some societies feel stifled, yearning for the creative volatility that defined our world's Renaissance or modernist revolutions, and there is a deeper emotional cost. A world built on the memory of catastrophe is a world that never fully relaxes. Education teaches caution before ambition. Rituals emphasize remembrance of past disasters. Even in the most peaceful centuries, there is an undercurrent of anxiety, collective fear that the ocean could reclaim what it once threatened to take. Atlantis survived. Yes, it thrived. It led humanity into an age of stability and knowledge. But it also taught the world to fear imbalance, to see progress not as a leap into the unknown, but as a careful negotiation with forces larger than ourselves. The hidden cost is not tyranny, war, or collapse. It is restraint. The loss of humanity's willingness to risk everything in pursuit of the impossible. History is a fragile, shape-shifting, winding, bending around the choices of people who rarely understood the weight of their own decisions. In one timeline, an island sank and became a myth. In another, it survived and became the compass of a different world. This alternate Earth is not better or worse. It is simply the echo of a different moment, the world born when disaster met preparation, when fear became wisdom, when a single civilization refused to vanish. And it reminds us of something quiet but profound, that we, too, live on the edge of countless possibilities. The smallest actions ripple outward. The slightest hesitation can save a world or lose it. And every disaster we avoid becomes a branch of history that someone, someday, will try to imagine. Atlantis may never have existed in our past, but it exists in our questions, in the stories we tell about resilience, memory, and the thin line between survival and myth. In the end, alternate history is not about rewriting the past. It is about understanding the present, recognizing how narrow the corridor of reality truly is, and how easily a different world could have taken its place. History didn't end, it just went elsewhere.